Have you ever wondered how a housekeeper could change the life of an autistic child by teaching him 9 languages? This story will challenge everything you think you know about labels and limitations. Black Voice Dramatic Stories takes you through an emotional journey of unexpected transformation. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment for more captivating stories. Victoria Blackwell had always prided herself on having everything under control. As the head of a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical empire, she had the world at her feet. But in the cold, lavish hallways of her $40 million mansion, a different reality was starting to surface, one she couldn't ignore any longer. Her life, filled with power, wealth, and accomplishments, had always been pristine. Yet, there was something unsettling about her son, Oliver. For 2 long years, her once lively boy had retreated into silence, showing no sign of the child he once was. Her frustration grew with each passing day, and no matter how many specialists she consulted, the conclusion was always the same. Oliver was severely autistic and wouldn't be able to communicate like other children. But what Victoria failed to see, what she refused to acknowledge, was that Oliver wasn't broken. He was just misunderstood. That afternoon, as she walked through the marble hall, her eyes landed on something, or rather, someone, that made her heart race with confusion and anger. There, on the floor beside her son, sat Lana Santos, the housekeeper. Lana, a quiet, unassuming woman who had worked in the Blackwell household for the past 3 months, was doing something Victoria never expected: talking to Oliver. "Why are you talking to my son?" Victoria's voice was cold, cutting through the air with the sharpness of a dagger. Her words echoed down the empty corridor as she approached, her expensive Louboutin heels clicking like a countdown. Lana looked up slowly, meeting Victoria's piercing gaze with a calmness that seemed almost too composed for the situation. She straightened up, her eyes not betraying a hint of fear. She had seen worse in her life. "I was just cleaning, ma'am, and he came over," Lana replied, her voice soft but firm. She knew this conversation was bound to happen sooner or later, but the calmness in her tone didn't reflect the storm that was brewing inside. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She had once been a professor of linguistics. The skills she had now were buried deep beneath a veil of hardship, but they were still there, waiting to be used when the time was right. Victoria's lips tightened into a thin line, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You think you can just fill his head with what exactly?" She gestured dismissively at the illustrated book in Oliver's hands. A book in Italian, of all things. Lana knew she had to be careful with her words. Victoria's frustration wasn't just about the incident, it was about the helplessness she felt in her own motherhood. Oliver had been a puzzle Victoria couldn't solve, a child who had withdrawn into himself, rejecting any form of connection. Yet here was this woman, an outsider, making her son do the unthinkable: engage. "Sometimes children just need to hear the language that makes sense to them," Lana said, crouching back down beside Oliver, her eyes never leaving the boy's. She was speaking from experience, not just as a linguist, but as someone who had worked with many children on the spectrum. She saw something in Oliver's eyes that the doctors never had, the spark of intelligence waiting for the right key to unlock it. Victoria scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You, a cleaning lady, giving me advice on how to raise my son?" Her voice was dripping with disdain. "I've had 3 of the best specialists in the country tell me what's wrong with him. He won't speak. He won't interact. He's broken." She spat the words out like venom. Lana's eyes flickered, a spark of something deeper than sympathy flashing through them. She had heard it all before: the labels, the dismissals, the assumptions. She had seen too many children cast aside because the world refused to look beyond the surface. But she wasn't about to let Victoria's arrogance silence her now. With a calmness that shocked even herself, Lana responded, "With all due respect, Mrs. Blackwell, I've seen children like Oliver before. They're not broken. They just need to be understood in a way that makes sense to them." Victoria took a step forward, her face red with anger. "What are you trying to say?" she demanded. But before Lana could answer, something unexpected happened. Oliver, who had been sitting quietly on the floor, looked up. His blue eyes that had been vacant for so long, locked with Lana's, and in that moment, he spoke. "Merci, Madame." The French words were soft but clear, filling the room with a silence so heavy it felt like the air had stopped moving. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. For the first time in 2 years, her son had spoken. The world around her seemed to blur as she looked at Oliver, then back at Lana. She couldn't believe what had just happened. He spoke French, Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. Lana nodded, a quiet satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "Yes, children like Oliver don't need to be fixed, Mrs. Blackwell. They just need to be heard in the right language." Victoria's mind was spinning. How could this be? Her son, the child who had been labeled hopeless, had just spoken, a whole sentence, in a language she hadn't even known he understood. She was angry, confused, and above all, scared. "How did you know?" Victoria asked, her voice barely a whisper. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, a realization, maybe a crack in the walls she had built around herself. Lana looked at her, not with the triumph of someone who had been proven right, but with a quiet sadness. "Let's just say, I've been on the other side of this conversation before." It was a moment of reckoning for Victoria, a moment where she was forced to confront the limits of her understanding, the limits of her own arrogance. For the first time in years, she questioned everything she thought she knew about her son. The child she had been trying so hard to fix wasn't broken. He was just waiting for someone to see him. The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of what had just occurred. Victoria took a step back, her mind reeling. She had been so sure she knew what was best for her son. But now, with this simple exchange, the foundation of her beliefs was crumbling. Lana didn't press her any further. She merely returned to her task as if nothing had happened. But for Victoria, everything had changed. What she didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a transformation that would not only alter her relationship with her son, but would also shake the very core of her understanding of success, worth, and the power of human connection. And Lana? Lana wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She was a bridge between a mother and her child, between the world's harsh judgments and the quiet power of understanding. But that story, for now, was still unfolding. Sandra had always been the invisible force that kept things running in the Blackwell household. She wasn't a key player in the grand scheme of things, not like Victoria, or even the highly respected specialists who frequently visited to consult on Oliver's case. Sandra was just the housekeeper who did the grunt work, dusting, organizing, making sure the mansion was spotless. But in the quiet corners of the house, she had seen things she wasn't sure anyone else noticed. It was on the afternoon of the encounter between Victoria and Lana that Sandra found herself standing at the top of the stairs, watching the scene unfold in the hall below. She had been organizing the pantry, her mind distracted by the thought of her own son, who was struggling in school, when she overheard the voices. At first, she thought it was just another disagreement, but the tension in Victoria's voice made her stop in her tracks. As Victoria confronted Lana, Sandra could feel the heat in the air, the crackling electricity of a conversation that was about to change everything. She didn't dare step forward. She knew better than to get involved in the Blackwell family's business, but she couldn't help but watch. From her vantage point, she saw Lana's calm demeanor, her quiet confidence, and it stirred something. Deep inside Sandra, a flicker of admiration, but also something else. Something she hadn't been willing to acknowledge before. She had always underestimated Lana, like everyone else in the house. To Sandra, Lana was just another hired hand. Someone to clean, to serve, to stay out of the way. But there was something about the way Lana spoke to Oliver, something tender yet firm, that made Sandra question her assumptions. Maybe Lana wasn't just a cleaning lady. Maybe she had more to offer than anyone had ever bothered to realize. Sandra's heart raced as she watched Oliver speak for the first time in months, his words, Merci, madame, echoing through the hall. It wasn't just the shock of hearing Oliver speak. It was the realization that Lana had done something no one else had been able to do. She had unlocked a part of Oliver's mind that everyone else had written off. Sandra couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, Lana wasn't just cleaning up the messes of the house. Maybe she was cleaning up the mess of a family that had been broken by their own ignorance. The next day, while Lana was sorting through cleaning supplies, in the basement, Sandra found herself walking down the stairs with a purpose. She hadn't meant to overhear the conversation between Lana and Dr. Marcus Chun, but she did. She had been on her way to fetch some cleaning supplies when she stopped at the bottom of the stairs, hearing snippets of a conversation that made her freeze in her tracks. "I have a PhD in applied linguistics," Lana was saying, her voice steady and calm. "I've published 17 articles in international journals. I've worked with 43 children with similar diagnoses." Sandra's mouth went dry. She didn't understand all the technical terms, but she understood one thing. Lana was no ordinary woman. She was a doctor, a real doctor with credentials and knowledge that far exceeded anything Sandra had ever imagined. The housekeeper she had dismissed, the woman she had assumed was just another part of the furniture, was an expert in something that could change Oliver's life forever. But there was more. Sandra listened as Lana spoke of the children she had helped, children like Oliver who had been written off by doctors and society. Sandra couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. How many times had she ignored the quiet woman who had been nothing but kind to her? How many times had she written Lana off as just another help who didn't matter? As Lana continued speaking, Sandra's mind raced. She remembered the way Victoria had treated Lana the day before, with such dismissiveness, as if her presence in the house was nothing more than a convenience. It wasn't just the way Victoria had acted toward Lana that disturbed Sandra. It was the way she treated Oliver, too. She had heard the way Victoria spoke about her son, how she had written him off as a lost cause, as if nothing could be done to help him. Sandra knew better than anyone that in this world, people were too quick to give up on those who didn't fit the mold. She had seen it with her own son, who had struggled with learning disabilities for years. People didn't see the potential in children like him, just like they didn't see the potential in Oliver. But now Sandra saw something different. She saw Lana's quiet determination, her belief in Oliver's potential, and it ignited something inside Sandra. For the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong, if maybe she had underestimated people, just as Victoria had. Maybe there was more to Lana than the role she had been assigned in the Blackwell home. Sandra stood there for what felt like an eternity, her mind spinning with conflicting thoughts. She had always kept her head down, never getting involved in the family's drama, but now she couldn't ignore what was happening in front of her. Lana was changing everything, and Sandra knew deep down that she couldn't stand by and watch without doing something. The next morning, as Lana was quietly dusting the library shelves, Sandra found herself approaching her. The words came out before she could stop them. "Lana, I heard what you said yesterday about your work, about Oliver." Sandra's voice was tentative, but there was an unmistakable warmth in her tone. "I had no idea. You're not just a housekeeper, are you?" Lana turned, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, recognition, maybe, or surprise. "No, I'm not," Lana replied simply, not defensive but open. She didn't have to explain herself to Sandra, but she did. She was ready to be seen for who she really was. Sandra swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her previous assumptions. I'm sorry. I never realized. What you're doing for Oliver, it's amazing." Lana gave a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes people don't see the potential in others. But sometimes all it takes is for one person to believe in them." Sandra stood there for a moment, processing the weight of Lana's words. She had spent so much of her life quietly existing in the shadows, never questioning the way things were. But now, she understood. It wasn't about what you did or where you came from. It was about what you could give, what you could change, and how you could make people see each other for who they truly were. With newfound clarity, Sandra made a silent vow. She would no longer be a silent observer. She would support Lana, support Oliver, and in some small way change the course of their lives. It was time to break free from the expectations placed on her, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could inspire others to do the same. Victoria Blackwell had always been a woman in control. As the head of a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical empire, everything in her life had always been neatly arranged. She had crafted her world to be perfect, just as her son, Oliver, was supposed to be perfect. But now, in the cold, pristine hallways of her $40 million mansion, everything was beginning to slip out of her grasp. For years, Victoria had worked tirelessly to provide the best for Oliver, to ensure he had every opportunity to succeed. But for 2 long years, her son had withdrawn into silence, showing no sign of the child he once was. Doctors said he was severely autistic, unable to speak or interact like other children. No matter how many specialists she consulted, the outcome was always the same. There was no hope for him. She felt helpless, and yet Victoria's mind kept replaying the events of the previous day, the words Oliver had spoken. Merci, madame. The French words had slipped out of his mouth unexpectedly, after 2 years of silence. A miracle, or so it seemed. She couldn't understand how it happened. How did a mere housekeeper, someone she had always looked down upon, manage to bring Oliver out of his shell? How did Lana Santos, her housekeeper, the one who had always been nothing more than a background figure in her life, get Oliver to speak? Victoria paced back and forth in her office, trying to make sense of it all. She could still hear the echoes of those words. Her son had spoken. After everything she had tried, everything the doctors had said, it was Lana who had somehow done the impossible, and she was furious. Furious that she hadn't seen it sooner. Furious that she had ignored someone who might have had the answer all along. Just then, the door creaked open. Lana stood in the doorway, not with the submissive posture Victoria was used to seeing, but with a quiet confidence, a poise that shocked Victoria to her core. She wasn't afraid. In fact, there was a calmness about her that seemed almost defiant. "What do you want, Lana?" Victoria's voice was colder than she intended, but she couldn't help it. Her frustration was bubbling over. Lana met her gaze, unwavering. "I want to talk about Oliver." Victoria's heart skipped a beat. She had expected Lana to cower, to apologize for whatever had happened. But instead, there was a stillness in her eyes that suggested something deeper, something Victoria wasn't ready to confront. "You have no right to meddle in my son's life," Victoria spat, stepping toward Lana. "You don't understand anything about him. You're just a housekeeper." Lana stood firm, not backing. "Down an inch." "I understand more than you think," she replied quietly. "I don't want to take his place. I just want him to have a chance." Victoria's anger flared, her voice rising. "You're experimenting on him. My son is not your project, Lana." She felt her control slipping. She had always been the one in charge, the one who made the decisions, and now, in her own home, she felt like a stranger. How could a woman who cleaned her house know something she didn't? Lana's eyes softened, but there was an undeniable strength in her voice. "Sometimes children just need a language they can understand. Oliver isn't broken, Victoria. He's just waiting for someone to listen." The words struck Victoria, like a slap to the face. She recoiled, her mind reeling. How could this be? She had spent years and countless resources trying to fix Oliver. She had trusted the experts, the specialists who had told her there was no hope. And yet here was Lana, a woman she had dismissed, telling her that everything she thought she knew was wrong. The silence between them grew heavy, the air thick with tension. Victoria's mind raced as she fought to hold on to her anger. But it was slipping away. Oliver had spoken, in a language Victoria didn't even understand, and it was because of Lana. A part of her was furious, but another part, one she didn't want to acknowledge, was beginning to wonder if this was the answer she had been searching for all along. But the truth was, Victoria wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. She took a step back, folding her arms defensively. I don't care what you think you know. I've been told by the best that Oliver will never be normal. He will never speak, never interact, and I won't have you filling his head with false hope. Lana stood there, unmoving, her face calm but resolute. I'm not giving him hope, Victoria. I'm giving him a chance to be heard, and that's all he needs. Victoria's breath caught in her throat as she stared at Lana, her heart torn between what she had always believed and the reality that was standing before her. Could she really continue to ignore what was happening with her son? Could she keep rejecting the possibility that maybe Oliver wasn't beyond saving? The room seemed to spin around her as she tried to collect her thoughts, her pride, her anger, and her fear all tangled together. She was used to being in control, used to making the decisions, but this was different. She had to make a choice that could change everything. Victoria opened her mouth, ready to dismiss Lana, ready to throw her out, but the words caught in her throat. She saw the determination in Lana's eyes, the quiet strength that said she wasn't going anywhere, and something shifted in Victoria's heart. She realized that Lana wasn't going to give up on Oliver. No, it was Victoria who had to decide if she would give up on him. The tension was unbearable. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as Victoria wrestled with herself. She could push Lana away, continue living in the bubble she had built for herself, where everything was ordered, everything made sense. Or she could let go. She could let go of the control she had clung to so tightly and allow Oliver to have the chance he deserved, the chance he had been waiting for. Victoria's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what she needed to do, but it terrified her. She could see Oliver still quiet, still withdrawn in the next room, but she could also see the spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Could she really take that away from him? With a shaky breath, Victoria finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay, you can stay, but if this goes wrong, Lena, if you fail, if you hurt him, I'll hold you responsible. Lana's face softened, but she didn't smile. She nodded slowly. I won't fail, Victoria. As she turned to leave, Victoria stood frozen, her mind racing with what she had just agreed to. She had made a choice. And it wasn't just about Oliver. It was about her too. About facing the truth that sometimes the greatest strength comes from letting go. 6 months later, the mansion that once felt cold and lifeless had transformed. What was once a home filled with the clinking of expensive china and the silence of unspoken words now echoed with laughter, with conversation in multiple languages, and most importantly, with Oliver's voice. His once vacant eyes were now bright with curiosity, and the walls that had separated him from the world had crumbled, piece by piece. Victoria stood by the window of her study, watching her son. Oliver was outside chasing a butterfly across the lush lawn, laughing in a mix of French, Spanish, and Mandarin. She never could have imagined this moment, never could have fathomed how a single decision, one that had scared her to her core, would change everything. She felt the weight of those months, the moments when she had almost pushed Lana away, when fear had almost kept her from letting Oliver truly be himself. But now, she saw the result of her choice. Oliver was thriving. His progress was nothing short of miraculous. He was no longer the silent, withdrawn child she had tried to fix. He was a brilliant, multilingual young boy, full of life and joy. Victoria felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sadness but from a profound sense of relief and gratitude. She had doubted Lana. She had dismissed her, underestimated her. But now she saw what Lana had seen all along. Oliver was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined, and Lana had given him the key to unlock that potential. In the living room, Lana was working with Oliver, guiding him through a new language exercise. It wasn't just about learning languages anymore. It was about connecting with the world. Lana had become more than just a housekeeper. She had become Oliver's teacher, his guide, and in many ways his second mother. She had become a symbol of something Victoria had never known she needed: humility, patience, and the willingness to see beyond the surface. Victoria walked into the room, her steps hesitant at first, but then more confident as she approached. Lana. She had something to say, something that had been building up inside her for months. Lana, she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I owe you an apology. I didn't see it before. I didn't see Oliver the way you did. And I didn't see you either. Lana looked up, a soft smile on her face, but she didn't interrupt. She knew this moment had been a long time coming, and she didn't need to speak to make it right. Victoria took a deep breath. I was wrong. I thought I knew what was best for my son, but I didn't know him at all. You've changed his life, and I will never be able to thank you enough for that. Lana nodded, her eyes warm, but her response was simple. You don't have to thank me. You just had to see him for who he really is. Victoria stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past few months settling over her. There was so much she had learned, so much she had been blind to before. But now, in this moment, she understood. Oliver wasn't a lost cause. He was a child with endless possibilities, waiting for the right person to see him and listen to him. She had spent years controlling everything, trying to shape Oliver into something he wasn't. But in trying to force him to conform, she had nearly broken the connection between them. What she had learned was that sometimes the greatest strength comes from letting go. Letting go of her fears, her control, her pride, and allowing Oliver to flourish in his own way. The lesson didn't stop with Oliver. It was about Lana, too. She had walked into their lives quietly, unnoticed, but had turned out to be the one person who truly understood. Her wisdom wasn't in her qualifications, though those were impressive. It was in her ability to see beyond the labels and offer something much more valuable: the belief in another person's potential. Victoria now understood that life wasn't about fitting people into predefined molds. It was about seeing them for who they really are, understanding their needs, and giving them the space to grow. She had learned to listen. She had learned to be humble. And above all, she had learned to love without conditions. As she watched Oliver run around with a new energy, Victoria felt a surge of pride. She hadn't just saved her son, she had given him the freedom to save himself. The moral of this story is clear. Don't judge people by their circumstances. Every individual has untapped potential waiting to be recognized and nurtured. Sometimes the greatest change comes not from what we do, but from what we choose to let go of. Letting go of. Our need for control can lead to breakthroughs we never thought possible. Belief and patience are powerful. We all have the ability to make a difference in someone's life, not by forcing change, but by supporting and understanding them. If this story touched your heart and you believe in the power of second chances, understanding, and true connection, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Share your thoughts with us. How have you seen someone's life change when they were truly seen for who they are? Let's continue the conversation and inspire others to see beyond the surface. Your story matters.